All right, welcome back to AI for 2021. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next panel is titled AI in the Automotive World, Use Cases and Roadblocks. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. And I'll hand it over to Roshni, our moderator.
Thanks, Patrika. So hello, everyone. I hope you're having an amazing time so far at the conference. So I'm so happy to be part of this panel, and we'll start off with a quick round of introductions. So Danil, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, Roshni. I came from Russia to US in '93, but before that I was studying and getting my master's in system engineering. All different disciplines were there, from mechanical, electrical engineering, fundamentals like physics and mathematics, to robotics and aerospace engineering. And I then went, after a brief period of working for Russian Academy of Science institution, I went to US, and I was studying for my PhD from '93 to '97. The last 2 summers of my PhD, I was working as a summer co-op or summer intern at 4 research labs in Dearborn, Michigan. And by the time I was done with my PhD, which was actually in reinforcement learning, I got an offer from Ford to become a staff researcher there. So I jumped right in, and I was working in exciting areas of applying machine learning, reinforcement learning, neural networks, before they were called deep neural networks, to various practical problems in powertrain control, optimization, diagnostics, and also various systems like a paint booth control. I also was involved in this project. 2005, I got an opportunity to join Toyota Technical Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I started to work on human-machine interfaces, autonomous driving, and various other futuristic projects, and not only doing the research myself and with my colleagues, but also planning for future research. And when in 2011 I became a department head, I was basically department head of future research department there, and I still am. So we showed feasibility of autonomous driving back in 2011, when few people actually demonstrated, just Google, effectively. And also we continued in this area, and recently our results became, or actually a few years ago, became the part of a very big initiative Toyota called Toyota Research Institute, and various activities that advance towards future products in the area that is clearly on everybody's mind. We also, my department efforts were also pioneering in the future mobility space, meaning the personal flying mobility. So these efforts also paved the way for a recent alliance between Toyota and Joby Aviation in 2020. And I'm very excited to talk about various of these things later. Thank you.
Awesome. Sounds like you had a fascinating career to different countries and different realms.
Three countries.
Yeah, and just different evolutions of AI. Like I remember studying like deep learning in my thesis, like when I was in my master's studies, like probably a decade ago. So it's really nice to hear somebody like coming from that era and like taking it forward to today's evolution of AI in automotive. Thank you, Danil. So now I'm gonna request Anoop to kind of share a bit about himself.
Thank you, Roshni, and really great to be here with the panel. So presently Vice President of HR for Ford Australia, New Zealand. My background is very diverse, worked in many different parts of the business, of course, in manufacturing, engineering, product development and design, e-business, technology. And then about 15, 18 years ago, moved into human resources and worked in Australia, Thailand, India, and the US. And right through the journey, the red threads have been a few. So one is around really how do we bring out the best in people? Because it doesn't matter what technology we use, whether it's AI, machine learning, deep learning, at the end of the day, there's still human beings involved. So how might we bring people together and really get them to work on a problem and bring out the best version of themselves? The second thing for me is about connecting the dots. So we know that there are so many different issues, and particularly in today's world, when we look at a business problem, no one point of view can solve the problem. So it's about really bringing together many different perspectives, many different points of views, and connecting the dots together. And then the third thing for me that stands out is really this notion of how might we continue to be forward-looking, be entrepreneurial in our point of view, be entrepreneurial in our perspective, and really bring out and support wherever the technology needs to go. But again, it's about solving big human problems. So that's me.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's interesting, like, we have somebody from the research and production side of things, and we also have you, Anoop, from like looking at it from growing of, employees and culture of a company to be able to meet some sort of like future of a work situation that is incredibly here, and it's here to stay for the next 10, 15 years. So I'm super excited to be part of this panel, and thank you so much for sharing some part of your journey here with us. So let's get started with some few questions here. So yeah, we've been talking a lot about, AI and its advent into automotive space. We are hearing a bunch of news in like self-driving, manufacturing, and many other sorts of stuff that comes with the pipeline of automotive. How do you see this to be as a hype? Is it really worth the hype for you, for the business, for your customers?
Yeah, it's a very tempting question, Roshni, because we all know about the Gartner hype cycle, and we're clearly seeing every year there are some developments there. And the last time I checked recently, the 2009 chart for the cycle was that autonomous driving, L4 level in SAE terminology, was going down towards the trough of disillusionment. From the peak of inflated expectations that were just a few years ago, down, really going down and down. And this year, for last year, Gartner hype cycle actually doesn't even show autonomous driving level 4. And in that respect, for me, it's realities that kick in. And we see it essentially left and right. There were various essentially marketing statements of various companies saying, well, we're going to deliver this, just around the corner. And nothing like that actually happens. So the products that really would demonstrate at a mass scale L4 autonomous driving are basically not yet there. Certainly we've seen Waymo and their developments in Chandler, Arizona, and recently starting I think in San Francisco area, but by and large, these are all require safety drivers. So you cannot really do, viable business if you really have a driver right there. And also speaking of Waymo, they also much more moving into logistics and trucks from a standpoint of basically making it more reasonable, where the driver is already trained professional and they carry a lot more goods. So that's where the developments are more like hype. They were just inflated expectations. And we certainly need to reassess it. And then there'll be slope of enlightenment from what I remember in the hype cycle, which will be going up. And then eventually we'll know that we delivered something in that kind of territory. But for automotive companies like Toyota, and I'm sure Anoop would agree from a Ford perspective, we're still developing advanced driver assistance systems. And those systems are basically what we've been doing for ages. And we're approaching it from a standpoint that could immediately impact customers, where our products called Teammate and Toyota Safety Sense, then we gradually enhance those capabilities as those systems, introduce newer and newer versions, which will certainly use AI to do it better and more with more comfort and more safety to our customers. So
Yeah, that's fascinating. You know, I resonate a lot with that. I've been with Uber self-driving division and then, you know, into Aurora's leading some of the AV trucks and ride-hailing services. And yeah, the hype was like extra hype like many years back. And then things happen and I agree, it's like kind of toned down a little bit with trust and safety concerns from the public. And then, you know, what I'm hearing is it's still, you know, important for us to continue to invest in this because it is here, it is happening. It's a technology effort that takes a really long time. I mean, Uber ADG itself like spent 10 years into it. Waymo spent a lot more than that too. And it's here and it's going to happen. I'm curious, Anoop, you know, from growing the business, like the culture from the people standpoint, you have a task of like investing and finding those people who would work for like building tomorrow's fully self-driving vehicles. Like, is it worth from your standpoint, like investing into this future hype? And how do you kind of go about thinking through that and prioritizing through that with your current business? I'm sure you have a balance to maintain with it forward, right?
No, it's a great question, and by the way, I love the way both Daniel and you explained the Gartner cycle and the hype and the whole thing about enlightenment, because that struck a chord. And coming back to your question, and if we go back and look at the last 80 to 100 years of history, and pick any major change in the world. So we started with the Industrial Revolution. And the same questions came up at that point in time many years ago. And as you know, Ford, was a pioneer in that whole space. The next thing that really came about was the whole revolution around internet and connectivity and connecting all the different corners of the world and making that, to a point where we've accepted that that's a part of our life. And if we have an outage, we have a problem. And the same thing with AI, as both of you were explaining. So I think it's definitely not only here to stay with us, but it is going to change, and it is changing the way we live, the way we work, the way we solve business problems, and more importantly, the way we are finding new ways of looking at opportunities and solving those issues, whatever those issues may be. And we're talking specifically about the automotive industry here. So coming back to the question you just asked, Roshni, I think that's a really fundamental question, because for two reasons. One is, if an organization is starting off from the ground up as an AI first company, it's a different situation. It's a different perspective. Most organizations, as we know, have journeyed along that transition, if you will, and they're embracing technology. They're embracing artificial intelligence. They're embracing all the other areas around that. So it may not necessarily be an AI first company, and that really presents a very interesting challenge for the leaders of the company, the employees of the company, the stakeholders of the organization, even the community at large, right? And the question, the central question there is, how might we bring the two parts of the company or the organization or the ecosystem together? The one which is very used to working on a particular technology that may not be AI related, and the other part of the organization which is more forward thinking, which is more AI driven. And if it is not thought through properly, if it is not planned in advance, if there isn't a deliberate attempt at bringing the two together, what we end up having is a lot of confusion, because people are really having challenges about understanding how might we embrace the two together. So I think that presents a significant challenge and opportunity. The second thing I would say is, at some point in time, if you think about from that perspective, as the way I explained, the two have to come together as one whole. You can't have two parts of the organization coexisting as two different components, right? They have to come together as one whole. So thinking through, how do we create the narrative and the culture that binds the two together is another really, really big challenge. And I think we can see around in the world around us, organizations that are doing it really well, and those that are thinking through and really recognizing that the two have to be brought together for future success. That's the way I would explain it.
Wow, that reminds me so much about, Amazon's culture itself too. Like right now I'm in part of Alexa Autowork. And Amazon is famous about its single-threaded organization, and that's how they continue to keep innovating. And it's such a unique strength that a large company continues to innovate, finding ways, and that so resonates with what you're trying to say as well. Previously I was at Aurora, and that was like a single startup, and it was a ground up startup, and it relates so much to they have the capacity to kind of build AI and a single threaded organization right then and there, versus in a big organization. And with Ford, I see that bringing that together definitely serves that purpose, and more the companies are able to do that and be AI driven, plus support their initial business and build that culture. It's a win-win, and you continue to innovate, right? That's awesome. So
Right.
talking about history, you made a point. It also reminded me of Martin Luther King's quote over here. We are not makers of history; we are like made by history. So I really love that you kind of mentioned about industrial revolution and smartphone revolution too. It's like nobody wanted it, nobody expected it. In fact, the research said that they didn't want smartphones, but look at us now.
Yeah,
So
totally dependent on them.
exactly. Awesome. So
Yeah.
thinking about people and the people who are using this technology, especially folks who want to kind of move from point A to point B. And this is kind of moving to our next question over here. How do you see AI in automotive impacting the way people move from point A to point B?
Yeah, I think so far the changes are not really significant. Like 5-10 years ago, basically we already had systems in the at the trial phases and demonstrating maybe through dealers or auto shows that could show people, yes, they could drive more comfortable with these driver assistance systems, or for example, have electric powertrain that could provide you with the benefits of totally green impact on what is now seems to be much more popular. We really have to look at it from a standpoint of how users would benefit the most. If I were to ride the cab now, the taxi now, I pay someone to actually get me there. If AI would be that good, obviously I get Sebastian Thrun from Stanford, who is one of the founders at autonomous driving. He mentioned it years ago that you gain on average 52 minutes of your life back. Well, very attractive, right? But we know we need to be realistic. It's going to be a while before we have such systems in our garages. But maybe AI could help already with the optimizing schedules, so you could have multimodal mobility in a better way. For example, if there are some segments of your travel that could benefit from AI-based optimization, yes, well, you have to be prepared to take a bus ride. And in the US, it's very, very unpopular. Only New York and a few other cities have a this kind of system. But what if we actually make it more attractive? For example, Toyota just now with Olympics showing off the e-Palette, our electric bus or minibus, effectively, that is carrying around athletes. And speaking of minibuses, May Mobility and other companies in the US are already experimenting with this kind of what is called last mile mobility. So we know in a GFN's area, in areas that we totally control, much more in a control of environment, we could basically apply AI now and get benefits immediately to people. And we talk about not just people who would use buses because they no constraints from the health perspective, but what about people who cannot afford cars and also cannot really ride the bus because they have a wheelchair or other constraints? So yeah, that's where we have to. We know the solutions are there, and they've been there already, years ago. We need to bring them to people, but people have to also think maybe they should accept it a little more because they're available, and AI actually showing you how to find those routes, how to optimize your getting from point A to point B, and it's I think it also works both ways, not just relying totally on AI and the latest and greatest technologies, but people behavior needs to also be a little more accommodating.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. My entire career actually has been around human and AI interaction, and you're so right. It's so much about not only the AI that is evolving. Humans who are going to interact with autonomous cars, their behaviors are going to change. When before smartphones, I go back to this all the time. It's like before smartphones, you never thought you could watch video on your phone. Like now we can't even leave the house without our phones.
Without it, yeah.
Right. So who knows? Things with the AVs can change, and maybe you no longer want to sit in your house. And at least if I had an AV right now, I would be going in that car and having my alone woman time, enjoying some shows, reading my book away from my family. I love my family, but that would be some behavior
your
I would like to inculcate.
personal time, yeah, basically.
Exactly. Or maybe just, spend time, doing other stuff like shopping or something else. But
more of that, yeah.
Exactly.
More driving because of autonomous driving makes it so easy. But then, of course, how about the rest of society that just overloaded with your driving too much?
Yeah, and the fact that you said it unlocks, transportation for other users.
Underprivileged, and
exactly.
people who don't have means.
They do have certain levels, but also being able to unlock it more potential for them is just, things that they could do then, go from one place to the other and go much longer distances as well.
Yeah.
This brings me to an interesting fact, Anoop, you've been through different countries, how do you see this affecting, people using that transportation? And then when you come back and reflect to hiring those people or growing your internal team, how do you make sure they're thinking about these problems that don't exist today?
No, that's a great question, and I was just also reflecting on both your perspective and Daniel's perspective about the whole issue with technology. And one thing that stands out for me, and definitely as a company, we're doing a lot more. In fact, that's a big part of the way we work, is this thing called about empathy. And I want to kind of double down on the word empathy, because that has so many different perspectives. And the biggest thing is, it doesn't matter which country you look at. One of the things is, if we can really understand and make an effort in looking at how are our products and services being used in the context of the user. So if it's a person in a small business versus a person in a big business versus someone who's transporting their family from point A to point B, the products and services in an automotive environment is really used in many different user settings. And if we think about from a technology and AI perspective, is if we can immerse ourselves with an empathetic perspective in that environment and really understand not just how our products and services being used today, but what are the problems, what are the constraints, what are some of the challenges that whoever the user may be and whatever that setting may be, that they're experiencing. Because technology for technology's sake, we know that it doesn't go very far. But we've also seen, whether it's the Industrial Revolution or internet or whatever that may be, if technology can be used to solve a user problem, it actually unlocks, and I love the word that you used, unlock. It really unlocks the ability for someone to use that at a higher level, and it unlocks potential. It creates new businesses, it creates new opportunities, it might save time, it might solve a particular problem that the user may be having. So I keep going back to the word called empathy. And to your question, Roshni, about whether it's culture, whether it's the type of people, whether it's hiring, doesn't matter, what aspect from an organization you look at it. If we are working on an AI problem or a technology problem, if we are bringing people into the organization who can empathize, who can understand what the user experiences may be, what it actually ends up doing, it creates an environment where the problems that haven't been solved can be solved with that perspective of the user in mind. So that is front and center in a lot of things. And one of my takeaways is if we can do more of that, is bring that empathetic perspective, it actually ends up with a much better result for everyone.
So true. You kind of, strung a chord with me on that. Amazon is like so much into customer obsession and thinking backwards. And even at Uber, we were like heavily obsessed with customers, literally. So much so that, we kind of go beyond and take some bold bets, right? And empathy, I'm so glad to hear that, it's like, as we build these innovative solutions, we need to have the strategic thinking and the vision of how that experience would be, and really starts from the heart. It starts from the heart. It starts from having empathy with not only our users, our customers, but how their lives will evolve, how their surroundings will evolve, right? A time back, Alexa never existed. And now everybody's home has Alexa devices in and around. The way they had reminders to go, it changed. It changed to being voice enabled rather than I remember putting it on my refrigerator, all the notes, and now I just don't. I put it on Alexa. And then just to copy that emotion and to keep that in mind while building products for tomorrow, that's not only AI, but also other trends within automotive space. It's really important. And I'm so glad to hear that from you. When we think about just how it changes everybody's behavior, and this is kind of a good segue to our next question as well. So we kind of know how AI is going to benefit a lot of us and unlock a lot of potential, a lot of new behaviors and things that we probably don't even imagine. And so cars themselves are going to look very different, feel very different, manufactured very different. What sort of software or maybe even technology may be leveraged that changes that rider experience? Maybe some things that your company is kind of working on, or you see as trends that will actually help elevate the rider experience in AI-based cars. Yeah. Maybe we'll start this question with Anoop.
I think it goes back to the whole issue around what are we trying to solve? What is the experience that we're trying to provide, right? And my mind goes immediately to, if I think about our company or any other automotive company, we are producing different products and services to really cater for different wants, needs, and desires. And from a rider experience perspective, if I think about a long haul trucking operation versus someone who is wanting to get into the car and really enjoy the experience of driving, the whole thing about feeling connected to that whole experience, it's a very, very different experience versus a completely different, I just have a transportation need to go from point A to point B. And can you help me get from A to B in the quickest and most efficient way possible? Now, those three examples I've given are very, very different examples and with very, very different needs. And it goes back to the whole central question is what exactly is the rider experience that we're trying to provide? And how might we provide that? And if I think about, and we know, right, AI is being used in long haul trucking operations right now. It's about optimization of efficiency, about fuel consumption, driver fatigue, driver safety. It could be the cargo operation piece of it. If I think about, I just want to get in the car and have a spin. It's more about how might we use technology to really give that experience about feeling like I'm really connected. And versus the third one, it's a whole different thing where we are connecting many, many different data points. It could be commercial data points, it could be traffic patterns, it could be time, it could be what is the exact need. So those three user experiences are very different. And the rider experiences or the needs or the customer needs are very different. And the biggest challenge of the question is, it's not providing one experience for everyone, but it's about really customizing that experience to the needs of whoever that user may be.
So true. You know, working through AV trucks, both at Aurora and then AV passenger cars at Uber, you're really like getting to that question here, like who is your rider, who is your customer, and then what are they using that AV vehicle for? Like one person may be using it for last mile delivery. Like Amazon has, of course, electric cars right now. Maybe in the future they'll have, I don't know, don't count me on that. But the other portion is passenger cars. They're using it for riding. Like Tesla uses it for providing for personal ownership, right? Even within like passenger cars portfolio, you can start to see a bifurcation of use cases that need special technology for that. There's also like AV trucks, and you kind of pointed to that as like, you know, long haul rides. Drivers are extremely becoming shortage, like in the trucking industry, and it starts to affecting the whole supply chain after that, and then increasing of costs that everyday consumers use. You know, this is probably tangential, but I really feel that, you know, the AV industry is going to help not only with, you know, solving all the transportation needs and, you know, helping with people, but also it has this impact across different other spaces that impact everyday life, you know, just like supply chain. And also you kind of pointed on this one was, and I do believe that is there's also like parallels, right? There are parallel technology and software needs across both. You still need a system like at the core, at the AV, like mapping systems and technology around that, prediction models that actually work. And that doesn't change from the fact if it's a truck or a passenger car, as long as we have that range and the radar sensing and the long range LiDARs for trucking. And when it comes to the software side, there are these services. I kind of classify these as the services. What do these people riding in the AV vehicles need? You know, from a rider, and if it's a kid, you want to have some entertaining, engaging experiences. If it's somebody, you know, interacting with an AV truck, you need to understand how shipping and management works. Like they want any driver to do bill of lading or trying to load a truck or to remove the truck. So how you're going to manage those kind of situations. So it's really interesting how we start to think about the different software and technologies that also need to be elevated to support that transition of fully autonomous vehicles. You know, pivoting now, you know, around this same topic, Danil, you've kind of come across different countries as well. And you've worked in both research, you've seen it from the production line. What is your take in how, you know, how it might change around the different countries that you've been, or what sort of technological advances we probably still need to achieve to get to that level of autonomous mobility for everyday consumers?
Yeah, and that's really from the standpoint of Anoop and you, Roshni's discussion just now, the point of personalization or making technology such that it's truly useful to you as a particular person with particular needs and unique requirements. That's what, in my opinion, that's what will be most useful AI applications. It's pretty much like you have on a smartphone now. You know, you personalize it the way that you'd like, and you certainly don't like it when it breaks down and there are new revisions, you have to redo it. If your car could at first watch how you drive, adjust to your routes, learn from your experiences, and then it starts taking more and more on responsibility as driving you when you really don't want to drive. Pretty much like Anoop was saying, boring, you know, mundane to and from work, or something that you really don't want to drive. You rather have a, you know, more relaxing time in the car or your personal time for whatever reason. It would be wonderful. Unfortunately, we don't have it yet, but that's where, you know, if I were to say what would be the most attractive applications of AI, that's where they would be. They would be really strongly emphasizing personalization for yourself as a person who wants it, and then, you know, whatever other functions that perhaps your vehicle is used for, whether it's a part of well, maybe part-time when you don't need it. It's used for some kind of fleet application, like, many people who are contemplating that unused cars would be used for something else, while the primary user is, doing something at work or at home. And that's where, technology will be quite important. That also suggests a potential way of rolling out all these fully autonomous or L4 applications, when you actually start with a vehicle that doesn't know much. It learns from you, and then, helps you more and more. So.
Yeah, I don't know if you all have seen these old not comic, it's actually a TV show called Knight Rider, where the vehicle would actually talk to you. And
exactly, it's a science fiction already anticipated 50 years ago or more.
Exactly.
And we're just trying to achieve that. We know it's self-fulfilling prophecy in many respects. Because we already know we would like to go there, but technology was far from what it is
and now
now.
we're getting much closer to like actually seeing and riding AV cars. And now I feel like we're in that cusp of improving all the different services that actually go with that. As you were saying, personalization within vehicles, like how do you have that? Like within Alexa right now, we've also launched quite a few products, and we started to see the importance of having Alexa home sort of systems within auto. And what does that integration look like? Like, would you want to get in your car and have that same kind of Alexa feeling? Whether or not that car is AV or EV, it doesn't matter. But also, it just highlights the point. AI within cars also needs to come with a lot of services and technology to help with customers, like be able to adapt to that technology. Wow, fascinating. And thinking about all these possibilities that consumers can get, both from whether you're an everyday user or a logistics company with automotive cars, I'm wondering, this is kind of a good segue to our next question too, is like, I'm wondering, what key challenges do you see in bringing AI applications into our automotive industry, whether it comes from like manufacturing or maybe production lines, or even like getting it out to consumers or shopping or retail of vehicles, right? What do you see are some of the key challenges that are preventing us right now within automotive industry? Maybe Danil, we'll start with you on that.
Yeah, and I'll let Anoop comment about just education and continuous education. Like, we have mechanical engineers that they typically don't know about computer engineering, computer science, and now they are under challenge from higher level managers to catch up with the state of art and development. So we could have a little more discussion about that. But speaking of technology, I would say that clearly, we are not yet there. Yes, we have some ideas on sensing, more and more advanced sensors such as radar, LiDAR, and cameras, and various algorithms or software that's rapidly developing to essentially make as many sensors or as many processing modules as smart as possible, basically, to achieve L4 autonomous driving. Speaking of application to transportation, same also in production or manufacturing, meaning manufacturing cars. I mentioned when at Ford I worked on a paint quality or control of paint quality in a paint booth, and that basically still there are needs to optimize production of cars, painting and all of this. So every manufacturer is certainly working hard to make appropriate elements of AI used for productivity increases. But basically, back to sensing world, if more and more of your sensors are smart and give you more kind of output about the environment, for example, your LiDAR gives you a much better, more reliable picture of the world that then requires less processing by the downstream processing elements and the computers, then you basically will be more efficient. You don't need to spend so much energy. And electric vehicles, obviously, if you have more of them, they'll be challenged if they have to process a lot of kilowatts. You have to be spent on a lot more processing. Same with the infrastructure. If you basically think, okay, now I put more elements in the infrastructure as opposed to on board of vehicles through smart sensing, I call it smart infrastructure. And Toyota's been trying also to do it with, from what you guys, I'm sure, heard about Woven City. If we consider infrastructure to be more smart, for example, we start building it now, then we could, well, few years from now, we'll have more such roads that don't require a lot of smart vehicles. They could guide vehicles, you know, because they following the markers in the road, whether visible or not. And so there are all kinds of developments that are possible to still accelerate it further. And I think companies, you know, collectively, we're all covering all the angles on this, but it's certainly, it's an issue that, well, will customers still embrace it, or they'll be content with what they have now, you know, 10 years from now, in spite of all this development, and they'll kind of be locked in the smartphone paradigm that they have the latest smartphone anyway, so it doesn't matter what car is doing. So
Right.
yeah, they will just use particular device. Car is okay for them, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's like internet, you know.
Yeah, it's there. You know, you use it. Well, you don't care what, you know, surrounding it, like what gadgets that are not smart. You're content using them as they are.
Yeah, exactly. Like today, for a second, my internet just went for a second, and I was like, I have the worst internet. And then it came back, and I was like, wow, I have the best internet. So it's almost like that. You know,
People
that's the
also
consumer feeling.
up and down, and depending on gadgetry.
And yeah, I mean, with Wi-Fi, that's a, I don't want to. It's almost like Wi-Fi versus an AV car. If your AV car doesn't operate the way it should be, with experiences, with its core functionality, I mean, you instantly lose that trust. Versus a Wi-Fi, I mean, you're going to rebuild that trust in seconds. Versus the trust with AV cars, it's going to take some time to you know, build it and then keep it. You know, as somebody, I don't remember who exactly said, trust can, you know, take long time to build, but it goes very quickly. Yeah, you can lose it very quickly. And I feel like that is, you know, as you said, it's I feel like that's a really huge risk within, you know, AI and automotive. And also, it was interesting to hear about, you know, smart manufacturing processes. Like, I would totally love to be part of that cool project where cars are like coming in, like getting itself all ready and then shipping out. That's fascinating. I'm curious, Anoop, how do you see about, you know, challenges that kind of prevent AI and in the automotive space to be released to the public and for their consumer use?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and I think Roshni and Danny, both of you kind of touched on this. I see two main challenges, and let me kind of distinguish between the two. So one is around the existing organization, and the second challenge is around the organization of the future. So with the existing organization, and Daniel touched on this in his opening remarks, if we look at the last 25, 30 years, you know, there's been some huge changes in the way we work, in the way we are looking at the future, in the way we are setting up organizations. And if we just look at the last 18 months, you know, the global pandemic has probably been one of the biggest black swan events, and it's still underway. And if there is one constant, and Daniel touched on this before, there is one constant to me, it's this whole thing about continuous learning. And it is such a fundamental part of addressing the challenge, because particularly for organizations, and most organizations have been, as we've been exploring in the early part of this conversation, you know, they've started with some level of technology, they're moving into more future-oriented technology. If we are not keeping up with the trends in industry, if we're not understanding how today's technology is evolving into future technologies around AI, ML, etc., then very quickly the current workforce becomes somewhat challenged, if you will, to address those issues. So how might we as leaders in organization, leaders in society, leaders in business, think about that and proactively continue to bring in this mindset, the spirit of continuous learning? Because otherwise the existing organization becomes very challenged and in a very difficult position. The second issue, which is equally, if not even a bigger pressing issue, and one of the things I was involved in was leading up the whole strategic workforce planning capability for the company a few years back, is as we look ahead into the future, one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is, what are the new skills, competencies, capabilities, and experiences we need to really deliver AI, for example? And the challenge, why it becomes even bigger challenge, is it's not one company, it's not 5 companies. Pretty much every company wants to be in that space, is moving in that direction for across industry domains. And if you think about AI as an area of expertise, you can apply to any level of industry experience. So the areas of skills require us to really think through proactively, because there is huge skill shortages.
Hmm.
And if we don't wake up to that fact, it's not that you can just put a job posting and bring in people, X hundred people at a moment's notice. You can't do that. It's a long lead cycle. So how do organizations think about that problem strategically 4, 5, 10, 15 years in advance and start seeding the requirements to really bring in the skills? And part of that might be retraining. Part of that might be, working in partnership with education institutions. Part of that might be really thinking about, these experiences don't exist, but how do we really start that perhaps at a school level? So they are the 2 biggest challenges, I think, Roshni, that will continue to face us. And the organizations that are doing it really well are addressing both of those.
Wow. I haven't even thought about the next generation of folks who, for them, this will be normal, right? This is new for us. It'll be almost common to them. And setting up those infrastructure in their young age is fundamental. We need to start thinking about that. That's really exciting. As we think about this, and you started to hone into some 5 and 10 years kind of predictions here, this is a really great segue for our next question. For the next 5 or 10 or even 7 years, pick your pick your level here, but one thing we've talked about as a trend is growing and strengthening that talent for building and developing or bringing automotive AI-based technology to consumers. And the second trend we've kind of talked about that Anoop and Danil, you kind of touched on this, is growing today's young generation as well, and including that studies within their elementary schools and colleges. What other trends do you anticipate? If you had to pick one trend that you can bet on, for sure, today, what would that be?
Well, one trend is a little harder for me because I have several, but one is very obvious to continue is electrification. We'll continue to see more of vehicles that more and more electrified. And others, of course, if AI becomes more and more catering to self-supervised or personalized help to a customer, that will be very, very important, in my opinion. That's what we should see also in that time frame.
Wow. So personalization of usage of EV cars. Anoop, what's your pick?
AI is here, so we got to embrace it. Second is, doesn't matter what we do, people are at the core of everything. So how might we really bring that connection and really help, whether it's an individual, a team, or an organization, to be their best and do their best work?
Wow. That's cool. So the second is really AI is here and it's definitely going to change. I believe one of the trend is going to be that, I can actually have an extended living space in my car, in my personal car, without worrying about cars. So I do think that it'll be an extended living space for me to be able to, do something beyond my home. So as we now kind of wrap up the session, I do want to ask one final question, since both of you have been through different countries, seen growth of technology. What's your most favorite country? One.
Well, I like them all.
You have 10 seconds.
But if you go beyond Earth, I like Mars.
I love that answer. Anoop, what's your most favorite country or planet?
I'll take a smorgasbord of all the places I've been to.
That's a very good one,
Okay.
Anoop. Yeah, thank you.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, Anoop and Danil, for this fascinating discussion about AI trends and its roadblocks. I feel like I've grown in my conversations with you. So I truly appreciate you being on this panel and having this discussion with me today. Thank you.
Very welcome. Yeah, everybody.
Thank you.
Wow, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you all. Thank you to Danil and to Anoop for being our panelists, and a special thank you to Roshni for moderating and keeping us on track. This has been amazing, and I know the virtual crowd is going wild with virtual applause. We really appreciate you all sharing your insights with us today. For the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.
Bye-bye.
Bye.